I'm your host, Kalen Cassetter, coming to you from the Green Valley of Opportunity, Binghamton, New York. This is the Empire State of Cannabis. We've got a very special guest for you today, Zach Sarkis. Zach's a personal good friend of mine and founder of Hemp Lab, a 501c nonprofit cannabis industry incubator based in Rochester, New York. Their goal is to help accelerate sustainable industry growth, helping individuals, businesses, and academia find their passion and place in the world of hemp. Zach has been named a rising star by Rock Growth, and I gotta tell you that this guy is impressive. He's hosted hands down the best hemp events in the state. And it's just so rare to find someone in the industry who's focused on helping others and not himself. Thanks for coming on the show today, Zach.
Hey, Caitlin, appreciate the introduction, and yeah, really happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, Hemp Lab, why don't you take us to the backstory on how you came to form Hemp Lab, the nonprofit, and what that looked like. Take us back.
Taking us back, all right. It's pretty funny that a lot of the origin of Hemp Lab came from my frustration, borderline jealousy of all the traction that was happening down in Binghamton. This before we met, and being like, there's all this momentum, there's money being funneled in there, it seems, and there's a lot of talk, and it seemed like there's a hub happening, but over here in Western New York, no one was talking about hemp, let alone cannabis. And this, it kind of drove me kind of crazy. And so from that perspective, I've had a background in the cannabis industry for a handful of years, dabbling on the West Coast in the medical and recreational. And my roots with hemp go back, to 2007, let's say. And so there's this kind of desire to bring the community to the table. And one of the foundations in looking at this emerging industry is the lack of support for small businesses, the lack of access to industry experts and the expertise needed to make, smart business decisions, and or from a community perspective, like age or, destigmatizing this plant. And so, in 2018, I hosted the first Hemp Lab event. It was a conference we held at Wegman School of Pharmacy, St. John Fisher College. And we had a handful of speakers. Actually flew in a gentleman named Dr. Jan Slosky, who's based out of an organization called Alberta Innovates. It's a state-sponsored program in Alberta, Canada. And Dr. Jan Slosky has been paving the way for industrial hemp for about 2 decades. And I met him at the University of Vermont in 2011. And he gave a 2-hour presentation on the utilitarian value of hemp and how his organization was researching it and developing it on the ground, and really blew my mind. Things I've been learning about for a long time, and you hear about the many uses of hemp, but here's a guy who's been making it happen. And of course, I went up to him and connected with him pretty well after that presentation, and I was like, oh, can I come volunteer or shadow you? And it was kind of a door that opened, and then we realized that just given the limitations and legality of hemp, that it wasn't a possibility at the time. So we stayed in contact. So fast forward back to 2018 or up to 2018, I've been spending a bunch of time just networking with people, looking from the research perspective of this industry, and was just able to pull together an awesome group of, a blend of PhDs and entrepreneurs that could really ground the conversation of hemp and cannabis. Again, we like to talk about the many uses of this plant, but who's actually doing what and where are we today? We also flew in Maddie Mead from Hempitecture, who's building homes with hempcrete, and a crew came down from Vermont. It was this knowledge that if we're not talking about hemp today, I was anticipating the federal legalization of hemp through the 2018 Farm Bill. And again, there wasn't a word north or west of Binghamton, I personally felt, of people talking about this plant and what's coming. And so, I felt it my duty and my excitement to pull the pieces together of people I'd met and built in this community, just start the conversation. And that conversation really kind of set into motion, some of these other events that I think we'll maybe touch base about more later. But it was really, we were lucky to host it at St. John Fisher College because we weren't just a bunch of hippies talking about a plant that, is pretty taboo. It was at the School of Pharmacy. We had PhDs, and it was a real legitimate event. And that, I think, opened the doors for a lot of the other events that we've been able to put on since, and build the community from there.
So so you talk about conversation. What's the power of conversation, right? Because anyone can hold an expo, right? You see a lot of these expos and these conferences, right? But you keep saying the word conversation. What's the power behind that in an industry that's just starting?
I think most of this knowledge that's, the latent knowledge of the industry and the experts it's transferred word to word, not screen to screen. So people coming together and meeting and sharing and learning, whether it's hands-on or actually hearing from someone's experience in a way that, there's a back and forth, not just a lecture, not just, someone who's giving a pitch. I think that's where people really have the opportunity to learn the most, ask the deeper level questions that I think everyone can grow from. And so, I've been to a few of these expos where you're walking around and it's overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff going on and you're getting lectured at. But trying to create a space where people it's a little bit more intimate and a little more personal. And that's where I think a lot of the growth goes and comes from.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And so you talk about other people and you talk about, helping others and helping the industry, right? I don't think you've said the word I in this entire podcast so far. And so, obviously it's a reflection on your character, but why do you think it's important that you look towards helping others and helping the community beyond just talking about what you yourself can do or your business, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've witnessed how the cannabis industry can transform small communities and big communities. I've also, from the revival of younger generations who feel a jumpstart, an opportunity to make a living and claim their place on, in this day and age. I've seen the businesses from restaurants to building supply companies really boom in places that were dying. And I'm aware of how much labor it goes in to maintain 99 plants, let alone 1,000 plants. And that kind of experience is embedded in me, made me realize how little this region is prepared, the East Coast in specific. And if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to push New York products, if the Finger Lakes is going to thrive through a craft industry, there needs to be a foundation that can be supportive of that. Now, is HempLab going to be the thing that saves it all? Who knows? But it is an effort to open the door, because a lot of the people who've been really paving the way for cannabis in general have been labeled as criminals. They've been, cast aside as someone who's operating in the underground. It's just this paradox of like a booming multi-billion-dollar industry when it's corporate owned, but then really the roots of it come back to people who've been carrying and developing genetics, building these seed banks, working with the plant, whether that's in an urban or rural area. And I think that I really know that this plant is transformative on a economic level, on a personal level. That could be mentally, that could be physically, it could be spiritually. These are all things that this plant has a huge impact. And I think that really without an intentional effort to support, the kind of industry I want to see, and that's one that's more, can give back. This industry is going to make a lot of money, and if we're smart, we can leverage that money to do good, as well as create a good living. And so that's kind of been the bedrock of understanding its capacity, understanding the need and complexity to operate and navigate this market, and wanting to do it in a way that's going to have a lasting impact, not just kind of be a bubble that we might be able to capture, get a little bit of, and then it gets taken out of our hands and goes somewhere else.
Yeah, so you talk about preparation, right? And one thing that I've been struck by at your events is the engagement of the business community in Rochester there, right? And, hats off to Bob Duffy over there at the Chamber. But, how you bring in engagement from the entire business community, those who may have overlooked cannabis, or like you said, this isn't just a bunch of hippies in a room, but you're connecting them with people who are saying things that they should hear and that they need to hear, right? And, last year, and I unfortunately, all the great events you had teed up in April had to be postponed because of the global health crisis with COVID-19. But last year at that Cannabis event in Rochester, where you had, Jim Alatris, who is now, a star in Cuomo's daily press conferences, right? You had Axel Burnaby, who is leading the cannabis program on the state level. I believe there was a majority leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, there. I was fortunate enough to be on the panel. It was hosted by a great TV personality from Rochester. I mean, this was a seriously high-quality event. It was sold out, right? You couldn't get tickets?
I think we had over 400 people in the room that show, or that event.
That was nuts.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Excellent.
And that's where, and honestly, my jaw was kind of on the floor. And that's the beauty of partnering with an awesome organization like the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. And I think, again, it comes down to, if we're going to have a successful industry, there's got to be buy-in across the board. We had invited, someone from the sheriff's department with Monroe County. We had folks on the ground level who are working in activism to ensure equality, across the board, and accessibility for this industry. We had scientists for and against cannabis.
The director of health from Monroe County, right?
Yep. And he was definitely in opposition.
Definitely opposition, but a respected voice. And I felt like after him sitting there and hearing all these very intelligent people give some great remarks, his position, I think he could see it as being not necessarily antiquated, but, you could tell he was now looking to support some of some of his thinking with some more facts, which is what we need, right? So, and I honestly, I think the engagement by the chamber there in Rochester is something that I've seen that's been unique, right? Even here in Binghamton, where you do see the cannabis and the hemp industry taking off, last year, the Greater Binghamton Chamber had events, and they were bringing up people from Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I mean, I understand. So there's this thought process of, well, let's bring in both sides. Well, yeah, but let's not bring in the other side if they're wrong and they don't have the credentials to be there, right? Because now you're putting a false equivalency out there that there is multiple, legitimate sides, when there isn't, if the facts line on one side or the other, right? And I think this is something that afflicts our perception of how we look at the news and how we look at especially science and fact-based issues such as climate change. No, there isn't really two sides to whether the climate is changing. It is, right? There's 9 out of 100 scientists on one side. That's not a balanced issue, right? And it's not a balanced issue to say that cannabis is a harmful drug, because because people have been using cannabis for decades, right? But I respect bringing the people, not just because they're on the other side, but because they're major stakeholders in this.
Yeah, precisely.
The sheriff's major shareholder, director of Monroe, health department, major stakeholder, right? So, how important do you think that is to bring the right stakeholders, but not necessarily just put anyone out there and give them a mic?
I think it's huge, and it really points to one of the biggest questions I've been dealing with. Of of course, we want to create a platform that offers a space for the voice, but also how do you vet those voices, and how do I not do it in an authoritarian way? And that's a big question. So going back to what you're saying, it's important to have a diverse perspective in the room. There's no one way. There's no one way, and there's so many influences and inferences on the plant itself that we have to start at this point of let's just talk about it. And so our intention last time at that 2019 Cannabis event, it was very much, this is not from the chamber's perspective, this is not a pro-cannabis event. This is a conversation that's essential and needs to have a diverse amount of perspectives to legitimize it. If the conversation is not inclusive, which may also include those people who are speaking, out of the wrong side of their mouth, or it's or not operating from fact, let's say. It's still imperative to at least create the space for the conversation, and then you really got to have a great moderator. You really got to have the presentation dialed in to ensure that it doesn't spiral, because even with the great lineup we had last time, it could have gone in any direction if someone was having a bad day. And that's a big question when there's just, people are just so triggered by this conversation, whether they're passionately for it or passionately against it. And that comes, from decades and decades of misinformation and, all the other slander and campaigns that have gone along with it that are mostly racially based, that are mostly, casting a really dark shadow on a plant that is incredibly diverse in its use and application. So we have to start from, especially in conservative areas, especially in circles that aren't traditionally talking about this plant. It's like, yeah, let's start from square one. So let's normalize it by acknowledging the elephant in the room, and then can we bring people who are legitimate to the table that can communicate from a place of fact, that can further normalize and is more, again, on the inviting side than it is on the pushing side. It's like we're not going to get anywhere by trying to push people into it. Yeah. It was like, one of the big things I'd learned doing some advocacy work with Rock Normal and groups such as CSG and the NYCGPA. It's like, we're not going to get anywhere going to these places trying to push these legislators into doing it. It's got to be an invitation. What do you guys want to see? What are the questions you have? How can we acknowledge that, and how can we come to the table? And so I think, in a way, trying to shape these events in a way that are again, I'm using the word a lot, inviting, but I think that's how you kind of let the shields go down if there's space for both sides.
Yeah, exactly. And so isn't it even a little more nuanced than just pro-cannabis or anti-cannabis? You look at events such as NOCO, right? You look at these big events, and what I see is the same people saying the same things, and a lot of them are paying to be there. They're paying to speak, right? You look at, MJ BizCon in Vegas, which, I was there with you, Zach, and you see a lot of the same narrative and the same thought process, and it's starting to become pay to play in a lot of these places. So is it actually more nuanced around the conversation where it's like, not only just are we looking at, okay, are the right people, coming with facts, et cetera, but are we engaging the actual stakeholders and the people that we want to see in the industry, have the knowledge that they need to succeed? And what do you think now when we talk about, you say it's so important to have a craft marketplace? Well, to me, that means you've got small mom and pop, you've got entrepreneurs. What are you seeing as the major barrier to entry? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of capital? Is it all of them? Is it the fact that there is market share being taken up by operators such as MSOs that really don't know what they're doing? What do you see as this cannabis incubator, as on the ground, as the major barriers to entry for this craft marketplace in New York?
Yeah, I think you hit a bunch of them on the head. It's especially going back to like the NOCO and these big organizations, these big events. It's like it's really catered to the multinational. It's catered to the large scale. It's also, you can find anything you want there. You can find the right people out on the expo floor that are going to be able to give you your small scale packaging needs. To all the way, to a massive extractor or, look to raise some money. So it's, there's kind of everything there, but who's missing out? Well, when it costs $700 to go for a couple of days, like most people aren't going to go, myself included. I don't have a budget for that to be doing it regularly. And I think, again, a lot of the conversation is a little bit repetitive, and it's a pitch. It's like I don't need to be sold anymore. I want to know what to look out for, and so going back to like the craft industry, I think a lot of it has to do with just general awareness. It's like right now, how many people in Rochester know how close we were to legalizing cannabis, let alone that industrial hemp is an industry that's alive and well, and what are the opportunities there? I absolutely begin looking at the issue of resources, the startup costs. Like what if I wanted to have a big, something I've been saying, like I want a rosin press and a half a pound CO2 extractor. I can't do that with this industry as it speaks right now because I don't have the license, two, the tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a GMP facility to be compliant. And these are all things that really create pretty large barriers to entry. And beyond that, it's like compliance. Like how can you actually play in the sandbox and do it in a way that's legit and you're on top of the changing laws? You are dialed in from your QR codes all the way to, compliance within the supply chain, your quality control measures, et cetera. And I think like if we talk about the existing cannabis industry today in New York, and then what we see in the multinational or the multi-state, like that national scale cannabis industry, they're not even close to being on the same page. But we know there's existing supply chains from the city of Rochester out through the Finger Lakes to, as rural as you get and as city as you get, as urban as you get, there's existing infrastructure. And they've been successful. A lot of people have been incarcerated and screwed over, but still operating in the system because there's a market there and because people have consumed and choose to consume this plant continuously, regardless of legality, which again points to the strength and the potential of the market. But I think the big thing is like connection to expertise, so you can cross-reference, so you can ask the right questions, so you can make sure you're staying within the rules, and then access to capital, and then really I think and this is something your group has been specializing in at CSG, is like the future is the right branding and the right narrative, and that's statewide branding and narrative, that's regional branding and narratives, and then business of like what are people going to want to buy in your target audience or in your city or your region. And there's all these layers that I think that's, again, going back to like why HempLab. It's like, because if we're not talking about these things, it's not even on people's radars, and that means there's less than a hair of a chance that people are going to be able to compete with these big companies that are ready to come in and drop their mainstream brands with their 100,000 followers on Instagram. It's like, that's serious influence and power when it comes to the branding and marketing. And so, long story short, it's definitely capital, it's definitely bench strength and resources, advice, expertise, and then just the supply chain in general.
Yeah, and true. And, the events business is just that, a business, right? So that's why it's so unique that you're taking, this role as a nonprofit and saying, okay, let's make this accessible for everyone. I can say firsthand, if you were a better blackjack player, maybe you would have a better budget to go to some of these events.
I'm pretty sure you saw my skills out there, okay? I'm pretty sure I left Vegas in the plus. First time there, last time there, hopefully.
But, not everyone can be a professional blackjack player.
True.
Or even be as good as myself, and obviously I'm been better than you. So,
Great.
We talk about
right.
We talk about tax revenue, right? Does HempLab, does HempLab as a 501c nonprofit, do they deserve to be in that line to receive some of that tax revenue from adult use cannabis so that you can make it work to lower these barriers of entries for these companies?
I think that's a great question. And, it goes back to, you asked me earlier why a 501c3, and I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. I've seen intimately the distrust in the cannabis industry. People don't trust businesses. They don't trust the government. They don't trust for-profit. Everyone's got a motive. Everyone's coming from somewhere, And I think that at the same time, the industry has operated completely peer-to-peer. It's been a business, all the best growers have learned from each other. It's been open sourced. It's been, on a certain level, there's deep trust and deep, borderline conspiracy. It's like the amount of fear that people have operating in this space, whether they're going to get robbed or undercut, etc. And so I strongly believe that the 501c3 not-for-profit is like, it really underlines the intention that this is something to help people and not compete with people. Of course, I'm not saying competition is a bad thing, but like how to open a door for trust and community building, because I think that's really essential when we're talking about supporting a small, medium scale business, across the board. And so, I think when talking about revenue streams, like as you said, we got crushed this April between Rock Normal. Big shout out to Mary Kruger, the executive director at Rock Normal. We had like 20 events planned through the month of April, and that was the lifeline from a membership. HempLab's a membership supported business model. as well as, of course, bring in revenue through events as we're able to. We've done a bunch of free events. We're trying to learn the best ways for monetization of like what's a fair rate to charge. That's a big question we're asking. But looking at such an entity that, like, yeah, really understanding the revenue models is really essential. And I do think that I don't know what a proportion is when it comes to tax revenue. I don't know if it's just is it a state fund, is it a county fund, is it a city fund that helps fund such things. But I do think that it is essential to have a resource that is industry specific, that is supporting and again connecting stakeholders to experts. And I think in that same breath, it's connecting industry stakeholders to experts in a way that's affordable and accessible. And that's something that, a lot of people are charging a lot of money for that first hour to consult, and you don't even know if you want to work with them. I firmly believe we all need to make a living, and I have my expectations what I should be compensated for my time and energy, and it's becoming more and more clear as the years go on. And I'm getting calls from big businesses that are like, just want to pick your brain. It's like, okay, like that's about to, like, not anymore. So what's the boundary? What's the actual cost of my time and labor as a consultant, as an entrepreneur? Those are big questions, especially in the world of startup. Like, it's so expensive when you have your legal, your accounting, all the, let alone your consulting for whatever your niche is in the supply chain. That overhead can be, it's extreme in many cases.
It's daunting.
It's daunting.
It's daunting. It's tough. And without access to traditional, financial services,
yeah, precisely.
It's almost impossible for a lot of people, especially if you don't have great credit or you just don't have deep pockets. You don't have friends and family that have deep pockets. And I think it's creating, inequities and inequalities in the industry.
It's like before we even start, before we're even out of the gate, it's that inequities there. That's like, if we're trying to have integrity, again, going back to who's operating in this field, a lot of people who are operating in the cannabis industry right now are self-employed. They're entrepreneurs to a certain degree. We could speculate about demographics. We could speculate about this or that, but I would assume that a lot of people don't have access to the funds required to build like a GMP certified facility, for example. Let alone, again, make sure that, as I've heard from the West Coast, like if you mess up in compliance, if you could face a fine that's so substantial that if you don't have, again, a pocketbook or a bankroll, you can get totally pushed out of business just for the steep learning curve. So back to that, like HempLab receiving funds from the taxes, I think that's a great avenue to look at. Other grant funding I'm curious about. We've been looking at it, but it's not crystal clear what the avenues are. But I do think that organizations such as HempLab should qualify for being recipients. And because, again, that levels the playing field. And I strongly believe that if tailored with intention, it can be very supportive to people from all walks of life. And we know people from all walks of life are operating in the cannabis industry today. They consume cannabis, whether it's a topical, whether it's a combustible, whether it's a hemp, you name the product, it's pretty equal across the board. So how do we ensure that those seeds are, and that opportunity is available for people who want to continue to stay in this industry as it opens and becomes more legitimate?
Yeah, no, I think that's critical. And so you talk about membership, and we're members of HempLab proudly. To our listeners, why should they look towards a membership with HempLab? How much does that membership cost, and how is it different for an individual or a business?
Yeah, great question. And so the idea is that, we're trying to make it accessible. And, one of the bottom lines of being a member is, again, April took a big hit out of us, but the discount of events that we're putting on, we definitely anticipate a lot more of a seminar, moving maybe towards more of the training format, but definitely, field trip opportunities for hands-on learning. And again, these webinars that we're building, there's a certain point where we have to obviously value that time and energy and also cost of operations. So, So being member supported, of course, will offer the best of the discount we possibly can for those who are supporting this program, this project. from a business perspective, we're trying to weave more and more opportunities of how can businesses reach their target audiences more, whether that's offering services or office hours. That's something we've talked about, Kaylin, that we're working on in the background. And so from an individual level, which we consider that like a contributing member, someone who sees the vision, is supportive, and is also learning is just looking to learn. We ask for $125 a year. We're also flexible. We're able to do payment plans, and it's not set in stone, but that's the expectation as it stands. For businesses, we've been asking for $525 a year annually, and but just with this COVID stuff, we've had to adjust our perspective. We anticipated a pretty robust 2020, and now we've extended our perks for another year because we really want to ensure that our members are getting the value over time. And we've also included what we're calling a sponsoring member. And big shout out to Harris Beach Law Firm based out of Rochester. They're our sole sponsoring member, and that's a minimum of $2,500, but that's really this level of organizations that are able to afford that and do want to be a community, a community supporter. That's opens a whole doorway of, we're able to pay for our Zoom account without question. We're able to really expand operations and have a budget that's robust enough that we know we can continue to show up. And we're definitely not. There's no paid staff at this point in time, but that would be the goal, to create enough revenue that's people who are working on the core level operations and making this more of a model that continues to give and build. It'd be great if we can obviously pay people. So those three levels are the way we've started. This is also a startup. We've been building it since 2018, but we have our assumptions. We're constantly searching for feedback and understanding what the best model is to operate and support those who are, committed members. And that's something we're rolling with day by day.
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. It's NYHempLab.org. Check it out. They've got some great resources. It's probably the best place for resources if you are in the industry here in New York, you want to get in the industry, and you need, you want some great information, you want a place to network, NYHempLab.org is the place to go. Zach, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation. Hopefully in December we can be back in Las Vegas. I can take some more of your money. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm pretty sure Vegas took our money. But yeah, one thing I want to say, well, first of all, thank you so much, Kaylin. I love what you're doing. And this level of engagement and communication you're sharing is something that, I think HempLab is fully behind. It's like, this is what gives people perspective, helps people make decisions, and builds community. And so I want to also say that HempLab isn't just looking for money. It's like, if people can see the vision behind what we're doing, we're looking to build our team. It's not Zach Lab. We got a community behind us, and really looking for people who have the resources to help us build out the infrastructure to be more successful, to reach more people, to connect more experts to more stakeholders. And whether that's for the next year or the next 10 years, it'll take a community, and we're only as strong as the community that supports us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for this time, and keep on rocking it.
Yeah, thank you. And for all listeners out there, subscribe, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That would really be helpful. And just keep checking us out. Every Monday, we're releasing episodes from leaders in the industry. This week was Zach Sarkis. We have some great guests coming up next week and the weeks after. So subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll talk to you next week.